Settle yourself into a comfortable position. Let the present day recede into the background. The hum of modern life, the faint buzz of electricity in the walls, the distant whoosh of passing cars will fade as you begin to picture a world that existed centuries before you were born. Tonight, we will travel to a place of quiet valleys and snow-dusted mountains, where the air carries the faint scent of cedar and wood smoke, and the rhythm of life is measured not by the flicker of a screen, but by the turning of seasons and the tolling of temple bells. This is feudal Japan, a land of beauty, ceremony, and discipline, where life was ordered by a delicate balance of loyalty, labor, and survival. Imagine a time when the shogun ruled from distant castles, and the common people worked the fields under the watchful eye of samurai lords. The roads were long and often lonely, linking fishing villages to rice-growing plains, and further still to bustling market towns. The weather could be kind, offering clear skies and blooming cherry blossoms, or merciless, sweeping the land with typhoons or deep winter snow. But do not think of this journey as an adventure. In feudal Japan, life was not something to be taken lightly. It was bound by duty, shaped by the land, and tempered by hardship. If you were to awaken one morning in this world, far from the comfort of your bed, you might soon find that you would not survive long without the skills, strength, and endurance that life here demanded. We will begin slowly walking the narrow dirt paths of a small rural village, the early sun just touching the rooftops of wooden houses. The sound of a bamboo waterspout dripping rhythmically into a stone basin. This is where your day will begin. You wake up in darkness. The shutters of your wooden home are still closed, keeping out the chill. The walls are thin, just wood and paper, and the tatami mat beneath you is firm and faintly fragrant. You share the space with your family, and privacy is almost non-existent. A single oil lamp, its flame barely flickering, offers the only light. Before you can even stretch, there is work to be done. In the countryside, your duties begin before sunrise. As a peasant, you belong not to yourself, but to the land and to the lord who owns it. Rice paddies need tending, irrigation channels need clearing, and seasonal crops must be planted or harvested according to the calendar, not your mood or preference. The day's first task might be to walk to the well and draw water, the bucket heavy and cool against your skin. If you are a farmer, you may find yourself knee-deep in mud within minutes, bent over in a posture you will hold for hours. If you are a craftsman in the village, perhaps you will be stoking a kiln or preparing tools in your workshop, working by the dim light filtering in through narrow openings. Meals are simple. A bowl of rice if the harvest has been good, perhaps miso soup or pickled vegetables if available. Meat is rare, a luxury for special occasions. You eat quietly, seated on the floor, mindful of manners that dictate not just how you hold your chopsticks, but when you may begin and how you place them down. There is no concept of free time in the sense you may know it. The day is a sequence of duties: repairing your thatched roof before the rainy season, mending nets if you live by the sea, preparing firewood for the coming winter. Even children contribute, carrying water, helping in the fields, or caring for younger siblings. Life is punctuated by the seasons. Cherry blossoms mark the brief arrival of spring. Their beauty, a reminder of life's fleeting nature, a concept deeply embedded in the Japanese worldview. In summer, the air is heavy and damp. The rice fields shimmer in the heat, and insects hum in a constant, gentle chorus. Autumn brings the harvest and festivals, small moments of relief before the cold sets in. Winter is a test of endurance. Food, stores thin, the cold creeping into your bones through walls that offer little insulation. And yet, life moves in quiet rhythm. The sound of a bamboo water spout tapping steadily into a stone basin in the garden. The distant call of a monk striking the temple bell. The rustle of silk if a samurai passes by on the village road. You live always aware of your place in the hierarchy. Your clothing, your speech, and even the way you kneel before someone mark your social position instantly. And in a society so tightly bound by etiquette, a single wrong gesture could lead to consequences far greater than embarrassment. In feudal Japan, survival is not just about food and shelter, it's about balance. Balancing obedience with endurance, tradition with necessity, and above all, balancing your own needs with the needs of the world around you. And as the sun climbs higher, you prepare yourself for whatever the day will demand. Let's jump into Tadaki's life. A fictional but historically grounded peasant farmer in the late Sengoku period, era when Japan was a fractured land of warring lords, shifting allegiances, and constant uncertainty. Tadaki was born in a small village tucked between terraced rice paddies and cedar-covered hills. The seasons dictated life here. Spring meant planting, bent knee-deep in water for hours, pushing seedlings into the mud, while the mountain wind cut through your soaked clothes. Summer brought heat and insects, gnats and mosquitoes swarming over sweat-dampened skin. Autumn was the harvest when the work was hardest, but the rice fields shone like molten gold. And winter was the season of hunger. His family had tended the same narrow plot of land for generations, but they did not own it. The land belonged to the local daimyo, and they worked it under the supervision of a village headman, who reported to the samurai steward. Every grain of rice harvested was measured, recorded, and a portion, often the best portion, was carted away to the lord's storehouses. The rest was divided among the villagers. In a good year, it was enough to survive. In a bad year, people simply didn't. Tadaki's father had died when he was just 12, not in battle, but from illness after a bitter winter. With no time to grieve, Tadaki had to take his father's place in the fields. His hands blistered before they had finished growing. Personal ambition was a luxury he could not afford. Survival meant planting, weeding, repairing dikes, and ensuring the irrigation channels stayed clear. Yet, in the Sengoku period, farming was never just farming. Armies marched often, and always with appetites, sometimes recruiting men, sometimes simply taking whatever they wanted. A daimyo's war could mean your fields were trampled into mud, your food seized as provisions, and your home burned because it happened to be in the way. Tadaki learned quickly that the safest path was one of quiet obedience. When samurai arrived to collect taxes, he bowed low, eyes fixed on the ground, speaking only when addressed. When a warband passed through, he offered rice and tea without protest, even if it meant going hungry later. But obedience was no guarantee of safety. One summer, rain fell for 9 days straight. The river swelled, the dikes failed, and the paddies flooded. The crop was ruined. Famine crept in quietly, like frost in the night. Villagers whispered of eating grass, of children going to bed and not waking. Desperate, Tadaki joined the other heads of households in petitioning the steward for relief from the tax. The answer came swiftly. The levy stands. The lord's granaries were for his soldiers, not his peasants. The tax must be paid. Rice the villagers did not have. It was then that Tadaki faced the most dangerous choice a man of his station could make. comply and starve, or resist and face punishment. Resistance could be subtle, working slower in the fields, hiding a small sack of rice from the collectors or open, like the occasional uprisings that sometimes flared when hunger outweighed fear. Tadahaki chose subtle resistance. Under cover of darkness, he hid what little rice he could in an earthen jar beneath the floorboards of his home, saving it for his mother and younger siblings. If discovered, he would have been beaten, stripped of all grain, or even executed as a thief of the Lord's property. But luck, for once, was on his side. Still, survival was not a triumph, it was simply another season endured. In feudal Japan, most people's lives were not marked by glory or battle, but by endurance. To live was to bend without breaking, to keep your head low, to make it to the next harvest. Tadaki's story is not written in the scrolls of history. He was never a samurai, never a general, never even a name known beyond the borders of his village. But men like him formed the invisible foundation upon which all the lords and warriors stood. And in a world where one wrong word, one missed bow, or one bad harvest could destroy you, survival itself was the highest form of victory. Imagine the night. It is not the modern, buzzing kind of night, filled with the glow of street lamps and the hum of engines. Here, in the Japan of centuries past, the darkness is deep, and it falls early. The day's work is done, not when you choose, but when the sun slips away. The moon, if visible, is your lantern. The stars, if the clouds allow, are your only companions. The night air is still, except for the soft rustle of wind through pine trees, or the distant ripple of a stream somewhere out of sight. And in that quiet, there is a presence you cannot name. Feudal Japan was a society steeped in layers of formality and visible order, but beneath it was a web of secrecy, traditions, and subtle codes that shaped every aspect of life. Outsiders might only glimpse the surface, but for those living here, mystery was not rare. It was simply part of the rhythm of existence. The people of the villages, towns, and castles understood that certain matters were never spoken of openly. A merchant might deliver a parcel to a samurai without ever asking its contents. A farmer might see unfamiliar riders pass through the mist before dawn and say nothing. Silence was not always born from fear, though fear was often present, but from a shared understanding that life moved more smoothly when certain things remained unsaid. One of the most enduring symbols of this hidden world was the ninja, or shinobi. Today, their image is exaggerated and romanticized, wrapped in legends of impossible feats and supernatural stealth. But in their own time, shinobi were both real and ordinary, woven into the politics and warfare of the age. Their work was not to duel in open combat, but to slip through the cracks of society, gathering information, spreading disinformation, sabotaging supplies, or simply observing until the right moment came. Imagine a small town on the edge of a fief. Its houses are arranged along a narrow dirt road, with a shrine at one end and rice fields stretching out beyond the other. At the local tea house, a traveler arrives, quiet, unassuming, with the accent of a distant province. They stay one night, maybe two. No one knows that in those nights the traveler takes note of the guards' patrol routes, the state of the bridge across the river, the condition of the storehouse where rice is kept. By the time they leave, nothing has been disturbed, and yet everything of importance has been learned. The culture of secrecy extended far beyond espionage. In daily life, etiquette itself was a mask, a shield of politeness that could conceal disagreement, resentment, or even danger. The bow, the carefully chosen words, the subtle avoidance of direct refusal. These were not just manners, they were tools for navigating a world where a wrong phrase could draw the ire of someone with the power to upend your life. Religion and belief also lived in the shadows. Shinto shrines, with their bright torii gates, stood in the open. But the kami they honored were thought to inhabit unseen places. A waterfall, a gnarled old tree, the curve of a mountain ridge. Buddhist temples offered a visible structure of rituals and teachings. But they also kept certain practices within their own circles. And in the countryside, older folk traditions persisted quietly. Talismans against spirits, whispered prayers before planting, the hanging of charms at doorways to keep misfortune at bay. And then there was the weight of loyalty, perhaps the greatest hidden force of all. Loyalty was both a virtue and a chain, binding samurai to their lords, artisans to their guilds, and families to their reputations. Breaking such bonds, or being suspected of disloyalty, could lead to ruin. Yet, within that system, people found ways to navigate, to bend without breaking, to say much with very little. In this world of veiled intentions and unspoken rules, survival was not simply about physical endurance. It was about reading the air, kuki o yomu, sensing the unspoken mood of a room, the direction of an unvoiced decision. For an outsider, unaware of these subtle currents, mistakes would come quickly. A word said too plainly, a question asked too directly, a gesture misinterpreted, and though you might never hear the consequences coming, you would feel them, inevitably, in the shift of how others treated you, or in the sudden closing of opportunities. The mystery of feudal Japan was not only in its spies or its spiritual beliefs, it was in the everyday dance of what was shown and what was hidden. And to live here without learning the dance would be to stumble over and over again in ways that might seem small at first, until they were not small at all. From the shadowed gardens to the candlelit corridors of a daimyo's estate, the unseen world was as real as the one in front of your eyes, and just as important to navigate. The sun has risen over the tiled rooftops of a castle town. Morning light pours across the walls, catching the glint of steel in the hands of men who walk with deliberate steps. These are the samurai, not merely warriors, but members of a class that shaped the very order of this land. In feudal Japan, power was not evenly distributed. It flowed like a river, branching and narrowing as it descended from the shogun to the great lords, then to their vassals, and finally to the people who worked the land. Every person knew their place, and to step outside of it was to invite danger. At the heart of this hierarchy was the samurai code, Bushido, the way of the warrior. It was more than a set of rules. It was a way of life that demanded loyalty, discipline, and above all, honor. Honor was not an abstract concept here. It was something tangible, tied to your name, your family, your future. To lose it was to lose everything. Imagine living in a society where a single act of disrespect could mark you for life. A misplaced glance at the wrong moment. A casual word that was too familiar for your station. Even walking on the wrong side of the road when a samurai approached could be taken as an insult. In the worst cases, it could lead to your death. Not in secret, but in full view of others. As an example, the sword, the katana, was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of that power, worn with care, polished to a mirror finish, and treated with a reverence that bordered on the sacred. To touch another man's sword was to cross a line so deep it could not be stepped back from. For a samurai, Their blades were more than tools of war. They were extensions of their very soul. And yet, the samurai were not free in the way one might imagine. Their lives were bound tightly by duty. A lord's command was not a suggestion, it was law. If called upon to fight, they fought. If ordered to oversee a domain, they ruled. And if commanded to die, to commit seppuku, they obeyed. For to refuse was to live in disgrace. This sense of duty reached far beyond the battlefield. Samurai were expected to serve as examples of proper conduct, embodying restraint, courtesy, and a mastery of both martial skill and cultural refinement. Many studied calligraphy, poetry, and tea ceremony with the same seriousness they gave to swordsmanship. To be a warrior here was to live in a constant balance between art and death. For the common people, life under this system meant a careful awareness of every interaction. To speak to a samurai was to weigh your words before they left your lips. To cross their path was to measure your movements with precision. And yet there was no resentment in most. The system was accepted as natural, as much a part of the world as the changing seasons. But for an outsider, this rigid order would be a maze without a map. In your own time, you might be used to questioning authority, to asking why before obeying. Here, that habit would end quickly. Not because you were convinced to change, but because the cost of resistance would be far greater than you could bear. It is easy to imagine the samurai as distant figures of history, their armor now displayed in glass cases. But in their time, they were very real and very present. Their power was not an abstract concept you read about. It was something you could feel in the air when they walked past. Something that shaped how you spoke, where you stood, and even how you breathed. To live in feudal Japan was to live under the watchful eye of those whose swords were more than steel. They were symbols of the fragile line between life, honor, and oblivion. And for those who did not know how to walk that line, the fall came swiftly. The sun has risen over the tiled rooftops of a castle town. Morning light pours across the walls, catching the glint of steel in the hands of men who walk with deliberate steps. These are the samurai, not merely warriors, but members of a class that shaped the very order of this land. In feudal Japan, power was not evenly distributed. It flowed like a river, branching and narrowing as it descended from the shogun to the great lords, then to their vassals, and finally to the people who worked the land. Every person knew their place, and to step outside of it was to invite danger. At the heart of this hierarchy was the samurai code, Bushido, the way of the warrior. It was more than a set of rules. It was a way of life that demanded loyalty, discipline, and above all, honor. Honor was not an abstract concept here. It was something tangible, tied to your name, your family, your future. To lose it was to lose everything. Imagine living in a society where a single act of disrespect could mark you for life. A misplaced glance at the wrong moment. A casual word that was too familiar for your station. Even walking on the wrong side of the road when a samurai approached could be taken as an insult. In the worst cases, it could lead to your death. Not in secret, but in full view of others. As an example, the sword, the katana, was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of that power, worn with care, polished to a mirror finish, and treated with a reverence that bordered on the sacred. To touch another man's sword was to cross a line so deep it could not be stepped back from. For a samurai, their blades were more than tools of war. They were extensions of their very soul. And yet, the samurai were not free in the way one might imagine. Their lives were bound tightly by duty. A lord's command was not a suggestion, it was law. If called upon to fight, they fought. If ordered to oversee a domain, they ruled. And if commanded to die, to commit seppuku, they obeyed, for to refuse was to live in disgrace. This sense of duty reached far beyond the battlefield. Samurai were expected to serve as examples of proper conduct, embodying restraint, courtesy, and a mastery of both martial skill and cultural refinement. Many studied calligraphy, poetry, and tea ceremony with the same seriousness they gave to swordsmanship. To be a warrior here was to live in a constant balance between art and death. For the common people, life under this system meant a careful awareness of every interaction. To speak to a samurai was to weigh your words before they left your lips. To cross their path was to measure your movements with precision. And yet there was no resentment in most. The system was accepted as natural, as much a part of the world as the changing seasons. But for an outsider, this rigid order would be a maze without a map. In your own time, you might be used to questioning authority, to asking why before obeying. Here, that habit would end quickly. Not because you were convinced to change, but because the cost of resistance would be far greater than you could bear. It is easy to imagine the samurai as distant figures of history, their armor now displayed in glass cases. But in their time, they were very real and very present. Their power was not an abstract concept you read about. It was something you could feel in the air when they walked past. Something that shaped how you spoke, where you stood, and even how you breathed. To live in feudal Japan was to live under the watchful eye of those whose swords were more than steel. They were symbols of the fragile line between life, honor, and oblivion. And for those who did not know how to walk that line, the fall came swiftly. The last traces of sunlight have just disappeared behind the jagged mountains, leaving the world bathed in the deep indigo blue of early night. You are standing on the edge of a small village somewhere in the Japanese countryside during the late Edo period. The year could be 1785 or perhaps 1810. It hardly matters here, where time moves differently. The air is cool, carrying with it the faint aroma of wood smoke and damp earth. A narrow dirt path winds its way between low wooden houses, each with thatched roofs that slope downward like the bowed backs of old men. A paper lantern sways gently outside the nearest doorway, its thin washy paper glowing with a warm, golden light. The shadows it casts tremble with the soft wind, like the flicker of a candle in a dream. Somewhere, a bamboo wind chime clicks softly, each hollow note dissolving almost instantly into the night air. Beyond it, you can hear the gentle splash of water in a wooden basin as someone, perhaps an elderly woman, washes vegetables for the next day's meal. The sound is patient and unhurried. You take a step onto the narrow path. The soles of your sandals crunch against scattered pebbles. The houses seem to lean closer together as you move deeper into the village. Their wooden sliding doors shut tight against the night. You notice the faint smell of miso soup drifting from one of the kitchens, the scent blending with grilled fish and the faint bitterness of green tea. Further down the path, an old man is seated on the ingawa, the wooden veranda of his home. His hands are folded neatly in his lap, and his face is turned toward the moon. He doesn't acknowledge you, yet there is no hostility in his stillness. It is the sort of quiet where presence is enough, words unnecessary. Beside him, a long-sheathed katana rests against the wall, its lacquered scabbard catching the lantern's light. The blade is not drawn, but it doesn't need to be. In this world, the sword is an extension of the man, even when at rest. As you pass, you hear a distant clack, 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 the sound of wooden getter sandals striking stone. You follow the sound until you see Hurrah woman in a simple indigo yukata carrying a shallow woven basket. Her hair is neatly tied, a single pin holding it in place. She moves with an unhurried grace, each step as precise as a brushstroke on paper. She glances at you briefly, and in that moment you catch the glint of moonlight reflected in her eyes before she disappears around a corner. The path now opens into a small square at the heart of the village. At its center stands a towering pine tree, its trunk wrapped with a Shimenawa-thick sacred rope decorated with folded paper shide that flutter faintly in the night breeze. At the base of the tree, an offering has been left. A small dish of rice, a cup of sake, and two bright men. They sit patiently in the moonlight, as if awaiting a guest you cannot see. A faint movement catches your eye. On the far side of the square, the sliding doors of the tea house shift open, releasing a spill of warm, yellow light onto the ground. Inside, three men sit cross-legged around a low, lacquered table. They speak in hushed tones, their voices muffled by the paper walls. The scent of roasted barley tea drifts out to meet you. You catch the faint glimmer of a shamisen resting in the corner, its long neck angled like the branch of a willow tree. You don't go inside. Instead, you follow the winding path beyond the square, past low stone walls covered in moss. Here, the houses grow sparser, and the night grows deeper. The stars have emerged, scattering across the sky like tiny grains of rice on dark silk. The moon, now high above, bathes the world in a pale, silvery light. The light is so soft, it seems almost to hum a quiet tone that makes the darkness feel alive. In the distance, you hear the slow, steady rhythm of a taiko drum. One deep note, a pause, another. The sound carries over the fields, each beat like the heartbeat of the land itself. You follow it, your steps growing slower as the path turns into packed earth lined with tall stalks of rice. The plants sway gently, their tips brushing together with a sound like distant rain. At last, you see them two samurai standing at the far end of the field, their silhouettes outlined in moonlight. They are not fighting. They are simply standing, watching something beyond the horizon. Perhaps they are guards for the village. Perhaps they are simply sharing a moment of silence before parting ways. One of them adjusts his grip on the hilt of his katana, but does not draw it. The other tilts his head slightly, as if listening to a sound only he can hear. You take a step closer, but the rice plants seem to grow denser, as though the field itself is reluctant to let you pass. The two figures turn slightly, just enough for you to catch the gleam of their armor before they fade into the shadows, leaving only the memory of their presence behind. The path now leads you toward the edge of the village, where the land drops away into a gentle slope. Below, you can see a river winding like a ribbon of ink through the dark landscape. The moonlight dances on its surface, breaking into 1,000 tiny shards with every ripple. A narrow wooden bridge crosses the water, and on the far side, the black silhouette of a Shinto shrine rises against the star-filled sky. You descend the slope slowly, the grass brushing softly against your ankles. At the base, a small wooden stand holds another lantern, its flame flickering in the night air. You pause, letting the sound of the river fill your ears. It is not loud, but it is steadier, patient. Endless voice speaking a language older than the village, older than the samurai, older than you. Crossing the bridge, you feel the wooden planks shift gently beneath your weight. Halfway across, you stop. The water below glimmers, and for a moment you think you see movement shapes that are not fish, gliding beneath the surface. Perhaps it is only the reflection of clouds. Or perhaps it is something else, something that has been here long before the first sword was ever forged. On the far bank, the steps to the shrine rise before you. Each is worn smooth by countless feet. The Torii gate at the top is painted a deep vermilion, its color almost black in the moonlight. Passing beneath, it feels like crossing a threshold into another realm. The air here is cooler, carrying the scent of pine and cedar. The shrine itself is small, its wooden beams polished to a soft sheen. A single bell hangs above the entrance, its rope braided from thick strands of straw. You pull it gently, and the sound that emerges is deep and resonant, as if it has been waiting all night just for you. For a long while, you simply stand there, listening to the silence that follows. Somewhere far away, an owl calls. The sound is answered by another, even farther still. You realize, suddenly, how easily you could stay here forever, wandering the quiet paths, watching the paper lanterns sway, listening to the bamboo chimes and the steady rhythm of the river. But then you remember, this is not your time, not your place. And like the two samurai in the rice field, you, too, must fade into the night. As you turn to leave, the lantern at the bridge flickers once, twice, and then steadies, casting your shadow ahead of you. The path home is long, but the night is gentle, and somewhere in the distance, the taiko drum sounds again, slow and steady, guiding you back through the dark. The Japan you would have stepped into was not simply a place, it was a cycle. Life here was carved into the rhythm of the seasons, each with its own demands, its own trials, and its own quiet beauty. You could not ignore them, not for a day, because survival depended on meeting nature halfway, on anticipating her moods, and on surrendering to her timing. Spring, in the feudal countryside, was not a gentle pastel postcard. It was a season of urgency. The snow melted into muddy rivulets that fed the paddies. But the meltwater also flooded the lowlands and carved gullies into paths that had been steady and dry in winter. This was planting season, and the entire village would turn out, ankle deep in cold, sucking mud, to guide delicate green rice shoots into rows that must be perfectly straight. There was no rushing this work. Each plant had to be settled into the earth with the right spacing, the right pressure. Too loose and it would wash away, too tight and it would choke. For someone unused to such labor, the days would feel endless, the dampness creeping into your bones, your back bending under the rhythm of work that could not be hurried. Summer brought the rice to life, and with it a constant battle against weeds, pests, and the oppressive, humid heat. The air would hang heavy, cicadas droning from the trees, their chorus almost maddening in its persistence. Your clothes would cling to you, the sun burning the nape of your neck, and the scent of wet vegetation would be everywhere. Typhoon season hovered always at the edges of the mind. A single storm could flatten a year's labor in a night. You would watch the clouds gather and feel that familiar tension ripple through the village as shutters were tied, tools brought inside, and prayers offered to the gods of wind and water. Autumn was both reward and risk. The rice ripened, golden and heavy in the fields, and harvest began in a rush of motion. Men and women worked side by side, cutting stalks, bundling them into sheaves, and setting them to dry on tall wooden racks. The work was faster now, the energy sharper. The season demanded it. But the threat of an early frost or an unexpected storm meant there was no room for delay. Your body, already worn from months of labor, would be pushed once more. The days stretching long into twilight. And then came winter, the deep pause. The paddies lay dormant, the fields bare. Snow blanketed the rooftops, muffling the world into a hushed stillness. But still, survival did not stop. This was the time for mending, repairing tools, weaving straw sandals, patching clothing. It was the season for storytelling by the fire, for quiet rituals, and for enduring the hunger that sometimes came when stored rice ran low. If you were a stranger here, unused to the way the year looped back upon itself, you might feel trapped by the constancy of it. But to the people of feudal Japan, this cycle was life, an unbroken circle where every season carried both gift and burden. Even if you learned the work, the seasons, and the language, there was another barrier you would have to cross, and it was the one most invisible to outsiders. The world of feudal Japan was bound by threads you could not see, an intricate net of customs, etiquette, and unspoken understandings. To break them was not merely awkward. It could mean losing trust, losing protection, or even facing dangerous consequences. Here, greetings were not casual. They were precise gestures, weighted with meaning. The depth of your bow, the length of your pause, the words you chose. All of these told your place in the unspoken hierarchy. Addressing someone of higher status with too little formality could be read as arrogance. Too much deference could seem insincere. Even silence had rules. A misplaced glance, a hesitation before accepting a gift, could ripple outward into quiet disapproval that you might never hear voiced. In the home, there was a choreography to daily life. You removed your sandals before stepping onto the tatami mats, but not just anywhere. They had to be placed neatly, toes pointing outward. When offered tea, you did not simply drink. You admired the cup. You turned it gently before sipping. You expressed thanks not once, but twice. Meals were shared in an order that respected seniority. To reach for food before your elder had begun was unthinkable. And then there were the deeper, more complex codes, the expectations of loyalty, of honor, of duty that flowed beneath the surface of every interaction. A promise was not a casual word here. It was a binding thread. A favor given created a debt that might be called upon years later. In such a world, relationships were not light bonds. They were woven with patience and care, and to betray them, even unknowingly, could mark you forever. The samurai class lived by Bushido, a moral code that prized honor above life itself. But even common farmers and merchants had their own invisible codes, equally strict in their own way. You might be welcomed as a guest, offered food and shelter, and yet still stand on the outside of this intricate web. You would not know which festivals required which offerings, which words were safe to speak during certain months, which small gestures of respect were expected in moments of grief or joy. It was not that the people of feudal Japan were unkind to strangers. Many would show courtesy and even warmth. But without understanding these unspoken rules, you would always remain a shadow at the edge of their world, watching a dance whose steps you could not quite follow. And in a society where belonging was survival, that distance could be as dangerous as any sword if you truly lived in feudal Japan. Not as a tourist, not as a spectator, but as someone breathing its air, eating its food, waking and sleeping under its same moon. you would change. At first, the change would be in small, almost unnoticeable ways. You would start waking earlier, rising with the sound of roosters and the faint grey light of dawn. You would find yourself bowing more, not just out of politeness, but because here gestures spoke as loudly as words. You would walk more slowly along the dirt roads, not because you had nowhere to be, but because you'd learned that hurrying in this world often meant missing its quiet beauty. You would also learn caution. This was a land where a wrong word in the wrong ear could alter the course of your life, where the hierarchy was steep, and stepping outside your place could draw eyes you did not want on you. Survival here was not only about strength, it was about understanding where you stood and when to stand still. But deeper than survival, you would absorb the rhythm of this place. You would see that life was not a single race to be run, but a series of seasons, each with its own work, its own festivals, its own losses and joys. And when the time came for you to leave, whether after a month, a year, or a lifetime, you would carry something with you that you could not easily explain. A quietness, a patience, a tenderness for fleeting things. Feudal Japan would not simply be a chapter in your story. It would be a place that rewrote parts of you in its own script, and left you reading the world a little differently ever after.